Madison Clarke thought humiliating the quiet woman in the beige coat would entertain her VIP clients for a few harmless minutes. She had no idea the entire future of Pierce and Veil luxury was about to change because of it. The laughter started softly. A few amused chuckles near the jewelry counter, then another near the silk display. By the time Eleanor Brooks reached the center of the showroom, half the boutique had already decided exactly who she was. Not rich enough. Not polished enough. Not welcome. The marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers overhead as Eleanor paused beside a limited edition Italian handbag displayed beneath glass. Her coat looked at least 10 years old. The leather strap of her purse was slightly worn near the buckle. In a store where women arrived wrapped in designer cashmere and men checked watches worth more than most salaries, she looked invisible at best, suspicious at worst. Madison noticed her immediately. The boutique manager's smile tightened the moment her eyes traveled over Eleanor's simple clothes. She crossed the showroom in sharp black heels, each click echoing across the silent luxury space like a warning shot. "Ma'am," Madison said sweetly, though the sweetness never reached her eyes, "those pieces are reserved for private clients." A nearby couple glanced over. The husband smirked before whispering something into his wife's ear. She laughed behind her champagne glass. Eleanor looked calmly at Madison. "I was hoping to see the stitching on this one up close." Madison gave a soft laugh. Not a kind one. "This bag costs more than most cars." Another ripple of laughter spread nearby. Eleanor's fingers slowly withdrew from the display case. She nodded once, politely, but didn't move. That irritated Madison more than if she had argued. Most embarrassed customers rushed out immediately. This woman simply stood there, composed, almost impossible to shake. Madison folded her arms. "We do have more affordable stores 3 blocks downtown." Now several customers openly stared. A teenage sales associate named Lily Carter looked visibly uncomfortable from behind the register. Eleanor noticed her, but said nothing. "Actually," Eleanor replied quietly, "I have an appointment." Madison's expression darkened instantly. "With whom?" "Mr. Pierce." The room shifted. Just slightly. A subtle pause. One older client lowered his newspaper. Another customer stopped mid-sip. Nathaniel Pierce rarely met anyone personally inside the flagship boutique unless millions of dollars were involved. Madison recovered quickly with a sharp smile. "Mr. Pierce is in a board meeting with investors." Eleanor simply nodded. "Then he's expecting me." Madison let out a louder laugh this time, making sure the surrounding customers heard it. "Of course he is." More laughter followed. Someone muttered, "This should be good." Madison stepped closer now, lowering her voice just enough to sound dangerous instead of rude. "Listen carefully. People don't walk into this store dressed like that and demand meetings with CEOs. Eleanor's expression never changed. That calmness unsettled Madison more with every passing second. The boutique had grown strangely quiet around them now, customers pretending to browse while secretly listening. Madison could feel the attention and leaned into it. Public humiliation always worked better with an audience. "I'm going to ask you one last time," she said coldly. "Leave voluntarily before security escorts you out." Eleanor looked toward the private gold elevator at the far end of the showroom. The smallest flicker crossed her eyes. Recognition. Anticipation. Almost certainty. Then she looked back at Madison and spoke so softly the silence itself seemed to bend around her words. "I think you may want to reconsider that decision." And for the first time since the confrontation began, Madison felt something unfamiliar crawl into her stomach. Doubt. Madison refused to let the silence weaken her authority. In a luxury boutique, perception was everything, and right now every customer in the showroom was watching to see whether she controlled the room or not. She straightened her blazer slowly and gave Eleanor a smile, so polished it almost hid the hostility underneath. "Security will handle this discreetly," she announced loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Pierce & Veil values the comfort of our clients." The words landed exactly how she intended. Several customers nodded approvingly. A man near the watch display smirked into his espresso cup. Somewhere behind the fragrance counter, someone whispered, "Finally." Eleanor remained motionless beside the glass case. Calm, composed, almost strangely patient. Madison hated that expression. Humiliated people were supposed to look ashamed. This woman looked like she was waiting for something. Lily Carter stepped forward carefully from behind the register. "Ms. Clarke, she said quietly. Maybe we should confirm with Mr. Pierce's office before asking her to leave. Madison's eyes snapped toward her instantly. Excuse me. Lily swallowed hard under the pressure of several customers now watching her too. I just mean, if there is an appointment, Madison laughed sharply. You think Nathaniel Pierce schedules meetings with women who walk in carrying a $12 canvas purse? A few customers chuckled again. Lily's face flushed red, and she stepped back immediately. Eleanor glanced briefly toward the young associate, her eyes softening for the first time. It lasted less than a second. Then the cold composure returned. Two security guards near the entrance noticed Madison, signaling them. They began walking across the marble floor with measured professionalism, their black shoes echoing through the tense quiet. The atmosphere inside the boutique shifted instantly. Customers subtly repositioned themselves for a better view while pretending not to stare. One woman pulled out her phone halfway before her husband lowered it discreetly. Public embarrassment had become entertainment now. Madison folded her arms again. This is what happens when people confuse luxury with accessibility, she said, almost as if giving a lesson to the room itself. Not every place is meant for everyone. Eleanor finally spoke again. You believe wealth gives people value. No, Madison replied smoothly. Presentation reveals value. Eleanor looked around the showroom slowly. The chandeliers, the imported marble, the designer displays glowing beneath warm gold lighting. Then her eyes settled on the employees, standing nervously nearby. Interesting philosophy, she said softly. One of the guards approached carefully. Ma'am, he began politely. We are going to need to escort you outside. Eleanor nodded once as if she had expected the moment to arrive exactly this way. She adjusted the sleeve of her old beige coat, revealing the edge of a watch beneath it. Lily noticed it first. Her eyes widened slightly. It was a Patek Philippe Grand Complication, one of the rarest watches in the world, easily worth more than Madison's yearly salary. But before Lily could process what she had seen, the private gold elevator at the far end of the showroom gave a soft mechanical chime. The entire boutique instinctively went quiet. Madison turned immediately, her confident expression already shifting into polished professionalism. The elevator doors began to open slowly, and suddenly, the security guards stopped moving. The gold elevator doors slid apart with almost theatrical slowness, and the atmosphere inside the boutique changed instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the soft instrumental music overhead suddenly felt distant beneath the tension hanging in the air. Nathaniel Pierce stepped out first, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that carried the quiet authority of old money and corporate power. Behind him followed 3 board members and 2 executives from the New York office, all holding folders from the investor meeting upstairs. Madison's entire posture transformed in seconds. Her sharp expression melted into polished elegance as she hurried forward with a practiced smile. Mr. Pierce, she said warmly, I apologize for the disturbance. We were just handling an unfortunate situation with a disruptive guest. Nathaniel barely glanced at her. His attention had already shifted past the security guards, past the customers, directly toward Eleanor Brooks. The moment his eyes landed on her, he stopped walking completely. One of the executives behind him nearly collided with his shoulder before realizing what had happened. A strange silence spread across the showroom. Madison noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. Nathaniel. Pierce looked shocked. Not angry. Not annoyed. Shocked. Eleanor stood calmly beside the display case, one hand resting lightly on her worn canvas purse, while the 2 security guards awkwardly hovered nearby, suddenly uncertain whether they should continue escorting her out or disappear entirely. Nathaniel recovered first. He straightened his jacket quickly and crossed the marble floor with measured steps. No one moved. No one spoke. Customers who had laughed moments earlier now watched with widening eyes as one of the most powerful luxury executives in Manhattan approached the woman they had mocked. Madison forced a nervous smile. Sir, this woman claimed she had a meeting with you, but obviously, Madam Brooks. Nathaniel's voice cut cleanly through the room. Madison froze mid-sentence. Nathaniel stopped directly in front of Eleanor and lowered his head respectfully. I am deeply sorry you were kept waiting. The words hit the showroom like shattered glass. One customer actually gasped aloud. Lily Carter's hand flew over her mouth. Madison blinked twice as though her brain could not process what she had just heard. Madam Brooks. Not ma'am. Not customer. Not guest. Madam Brooks. The title carried weight. Familiarity. Respect. Eleanor offered Nathaniel a calm nod. It seems your staff was trying very hard to protect the image of the brand. Nathaniel's jaw tightened subtly. He looked around the boutique slowly, taking in the nervous faces, the retreating smiles, the security guards stepping backward, and finally Madison herself, standing pale beneath the chandelier lights. I see that, he said quietly. Madison attempted a weak laugh. Sir, I did not realize. No, Nathaniel interrupted softly. That is exactly the problem. The room went completely silent again. Even the customers who had enjoyed the humiliation earlier now looked uncomfortable standing there beneath the cold reflection of their own reactions. Eleanor glanced toward Lily, who still stood frozen behind the register. She was the only one who showed kindness. Eleanor said calmly. Nathaniel followed her gaze toward the young associate and gave a slow nod. Then he looked back at Madison. Do you have any idea who Madam Brooks is? Madison opened her mouth slightly, but no words came out. And in that moment, for the first time since Eleanor entered the boutique, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Madison Clarke could feel every eye in the boutique pressing against her now. Only minutes earlier, those same people had watched with amusement as she humiliated a woman in an old beige coat. Now the atmosphere had shifted so completely that even breathing felt dangerous. Nathaniel Pierce stood beside Eleanor Brooks with visible respect, and nothing terrified Madison more than realizing she had completely misunderstood the hierarchy in the room. One of the board members stepped forward quietly, recognition spreading across his face. Madam Brooks, he said carefully, extending his hand. It is an honor to finally meet you in person. Eleanor shook his hand politely while the surrounding customers exchanged confused glances. The name clearly meant something to people at the top. Madison stared at them, trying desperately to understand what she had missed. Nathaniel looked toward the security guards first. You may step away now. The two guards immediately backed off, visibly relieved to escape the center of the disaster unfolding beneath the chandeliers. Madison forced herself to speak. Sir, I was simply protecting the standards of the boutique. Nathaniel turned slowly toward her. By humiliating a guest in front of customers? I did not know who she was, Madison answered quickly. Eleanor finally looked at her directly again. Her expression remained calm, but somehow that composure made the shame feel sharper. That sentence explains more than you realize, Eleanor said softly. A heavy silence followed. Nearby customers suddenly became fascinated with handbags and watches again, unwilling to make eye contact after participating in the public ridicule minutes earlier. Lily Carter remained frozen behind the register, though Eleanor noticed the young associate trembling slightly from anxiety. Nathaniel gestured respectfully toward the private lounge upstairs. Madam Brooks, the board has been waiting for you. Madison blinked. The board? Waiting for her. The words crashed into the room harder than any shouting could have. One woman near the perfume display whispered, Who is she? Another customer quietly answered, I do not know, but apparently she owns everyone in this room. Nathaniel glanced briefly toward the executives standing behind him. Madam Brooks represents Brooks Capital Holdings. That name changed everything instantly. Several customers visibly reacted. One older man lowered his head the moment he heard it. Brooks Capital was one of the largest investment groups in the country, known for acquiring struggling luxury brands and rebuilding them quietly from behind the scenes. Madison's face lost color completely now. Eleanor Brooks was not simply wealthy. She was the investor currently negotiating control of Pierce and Vail itself. Nathaniel spoke carefully, aware the entire showroom was listening. Without Madam Brooks' partnership, this company does not survive the year. The room went dead silent. Every insult, every laugh, every judgment suddenly echoed back through the boutique with brutal clarity. Madison opened her mouth, but her voice failed her completely this time. Eleanor looked around the showroom one final time, her eyes resting briefly on the customers who had laughed earlier. None of them could meet her gaze now. Then Eleanor spoke quietly enough that everyone leaned in to hear her. Interesting how quickly respect appears once money enters the conversation. No one responded, because no one could. The tension inside the boutique no longer felt like embarrassment. It felt like exposure. The polished luxury atmosphere Madison Clarke had controlled so confidently only minutes earlier was cracking beneath the weight of a truth nobody expected. Eleanor Brooks had not raised her voice once. She had not threatened anyone, and somehow that made the humiliation surrounding the room even worse. Nathaniel Pierce stepped slightly aside, giving Eleanor the center of the showroom without formally announcing it. That subtle movement did not go unnoticed by the board members behind him. In rooms built on status, tiny gestures revealed everything. And right now, everyone understood exactly who held the real power. Madison attempted to steady herself. "Madam Brooks," she began carefully, "if there has been any misunderstanding, I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Eleanor looked at her quietly for several seconds before answering. "You were not responding to misunderstanding." Her voice remained soft, controlled. "You were responding to appearance." Madison's lips parted, but nothing came out. Eleanor slowly glanced toward the handbags, jewelry cases, and polished marble floors surrounding them. "Interesting business model," she continued calmly. "Selling elegance while humiliating people publicly." Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. One older sales associate near the fitting rooms looked visibly ashamed. Nathaniel's jaw tightened again. He had spent years protecting Pierce and Vale from financial collapse. But in that moment, he understood something worse than declining profits had infected the company. Culture. Eleanor finally turned toward Lily Carter. "What is your name?" The young associate nearly jumped. "Lily, ma'am." "Lily Carter." Eleanor nodded gently. "You were uncomfortable earlier." Lily hesitated, glancing nervously toward Madison before speaking. "I just did not think anyone deserved to be treated that way." The room fell silent again. Simple words. Honest words. But they landed harder than corporate speeches ever could. Eleanor looked toward Nathaniel. And yet she was the only employee willing to say it. Madison immediately stepped forward again, desperation beginning to crack through her polished professionalism. "Sir, with respect, luxury retail requires maintaining a certain environment. Clients expect exclusivity." Eleanor's eyes shifted back to her. "Exclusivity is not cruelty." Madison swallowed hard beneath the cold chandelier light. Nathaniel spoke carefully now. Madam Brooks requested to observe this flagship location personally before finalizing the acquisition. The sentence sent another visible ripple through the boutique. Acquisition. The word transformed every whisper, every glance, every memory of the last 20 minutes into something catastrophic for Madison. Eleanor had not accidentally wandered into the boutique. She had come intentionally, quietly, to see how people were treated when no executive cameras were present. Eleanor folded her hands calmly in front of her old beige coat. "Do you know why I dress this way?" she asked softly. Nobody answered. "Because when people think you have nothing to offer, they reveal who they really are." Somewhere near the fragrance section, a customer slowly set down a champagne glass. Another quietly walked toward the exit, unwilling to remain part of the scene any longer. Madison's composure was fading rapidly now. "Madam Brooks, please allow me to correct this." Eleanor gave the smallest nod. "You already corrected it." Madison blinked in confusion. Eleanor's gaze moved briefly toward Lily again. "By showing me exactly who should and should not represent this company." The room went still, completely still. And for the first time in years, Madison Clarke realized her expensive clothes, polished image, and carefully rehearsed authority meant absolutely nothing. Madison Clarke felt the room slipping away from her piece by piece. The boutique she once controlled with absolute confidence now stood silent around her like a courtroom waiting for judgment. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. The same customers who had smirked at Eleanor Brooks minutes earlier now avoided even looking in Madison's direction. Nathaniel Pierce adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit slowly, buying himself a moment to think. He had spent the last year convincing Brooks Capital Holdings that Pierce and Vale deserved to survive. The company had prestige, history, recognition across Manhattan luxury circles. But Eleanor Brooks had made one thing painfully clear without raising her voice once. Prestige meant nothing without dignity behind it. One of the board members stepped closer to Nathaniel and lowered his voice carefully. "The investors upstairs are still waiting." Nathaniel nodded without looking away from Eleanor. "They can wait longer." That sentence alone stunned several employees. Nathaniel Pierce never delayed investor meetings. Ever. Madison heard it too, and panic flashed across her face again. Eleanor glanced toward the large showroom windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Outside, black SUVs rolled through rainy Manhattan traffic while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside the boutique, time itself seemed frozen beneath crystal chandeliers and polished gold fixtures. "Do you know what interested me about this company originally?" Eleanor asked quietly. No one answered. Not the profit margins. Not the celebrity partnerships. Her eyes moved slowly across the employees, standing rigid with anxiety. It was the idea that luxury could still feel human. Lily Carter looked down immediately, visibly emotional now. Madison tried once more to regain control of the situation. "Madam Brooks, I can assure you this incident does not reflect our company values." Eleanor turned toward her calmly. "No, it reflects them perfectly." The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Madison's shoulders dropped slightly as though something inside her finally collapsed. Nathaniel exhaled quietly, knowing the moment could no longer be managed through corporate language or polished apologies. The truth had already exposed itself too publicly. Eleanor stepped slowly toward the center of the showroom, her old beige coat brushing softly against the marble floor as employees instinctively moved aside for her. "People reveal themselves most honestly when they believe someone has nothing to offer them," she said. "That is why I stopped dressing like wealth years ago." Several customers listened now with visible discomfort. One woman who had laughed earlier stared silently at the floor. Eleanor continued softly. "Kindness that only appears around status is not kindness. It is performance." The room went completely still again. Nathaniel finally looked toward Lily. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months, sir," she answered nervously. Nathaniel nodded once. "And you were the only person willing to show decency today." Madison closed her eyes briefly. She already understood where this was heading. Eleanor looked at Lily gently. "Would you still have helped me if I had truly been poor?" Lily answered immediately. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor smiled for the first time since entering the boutique. It was small, quiet, but genuine. And somehow that simple smile changed the atmosphere of the entire room more than all the expensive elegance surrounding them. Nathaniel straightened slightly before speaking carefully to the board members behind him. "Prepare the conference room upstairs." Then he looked toward Lily. "You will join us." Lily's eyes widened in shock. Madison stared in disbelief as the young associate she barely acknowledged moments earlier suddenly found herself standing beside executives and investors. Eleanor glanced back at Madison one final time. Luxury without compassion is just decoration. And once again, the room had no answer for her. The private conference room upstairs overlooked a rain-soaked Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath late afternoon light. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city across polished black marble tables, while executives from Pierce and Vail sat in complete silence, still shaken by what had happened downstairs. Eleanor Brooks entered last. The same old beige coat, the same worn canvas purse. Yet the moment she walked into the room, every executive rose to their feet automatically. Every single one except Madison Clarke, who remained near the far end of the table looking emotionally exhausted, as though the last hour had stripped away the identity she spent years constructing. Nathaniel Pierce gestured respectfully toward the head seat. "Madam Brooks." Eleanor sat calmly without urgency, while Lily Carter hesitated awkwardly near the doorway, clearly unsure why she had even been invited into a room filled with multi-million-dollar executives. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "Please," he said gently, pulling out a chair for her personally. "Sit." Lily's eyes widened again. Madison watched the scene in stunned disbelief. Nathaniel Pierce had never once pulled out a chair for her. Not in 3 years. The room settled slowly into tense silence while rain tapped softly against the windows high above Fifth Avenue. One executive finally cleared his throat carefully. "Madam Brooks, before we discuss acquisition terms, I would like to formally apologize for what occurred downstairs." Several others nodded immediately. Eleanor folded her hands quietly on the marble table. What occurred downstairs was valuable. The executives exchanged uncertain looks. Eleanor continued calmly. "Numbers can hide problems. People rarely do." Madison stared downward at the reflection of chandelier light across the table surface. Nathaniel spoke carefully now, his voice carrying visible disappointment. Pierce and Vale has spent decades building a reputation around sophistication. Eleanor looked toward him gently. Sophistication without humanity eventually becomes arrogance. No one disagreed, because no one could. Lily sat completely still, trying not to draw attention to herself, though Eleanor noticed the young associate nervously twisting her employee badge beneath the table. "How old are you, Lily?" Eleanor asked softly. 22, ma'am. "First corporate job?" "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And yet somehow you understood something experienced executives forgot." Madison finally looked up. Her mascara had begun fading slightly beneath tired eyes that no longer carried the cold confidence from downstairs. "Madam Brooks," she said quietly, "I built my entire career trying to protect this brand." Eleanor studied her for a long moment before answering. "No, you protected the appearance of the brand." The sentence landed softly, but its honesty cut deeper than humiliation ever could. Madison swallowed hard, visibly struggling to maintain composure. "Do you know why luxury companies fail?" Eleanor asked the room. Nobody answered. Because eventually they begin treating ordinary people like inconveniences instead of human beings. Nathaniel lowered his eyes slightly. He knew she was right. The financial reports already showed declining customer trust. Younger buyers no longer connected with companies that felt cold or elitist. Eleanor reached into her old canvas purse and removed a thin folder before sliding it across the marble table. Nathaniel opened it carefully. His expression changed instantly. One executive inhaled sharply beside him. Madison leaned forward slightly despite herself. The document was not a proposal. It was a finalized controlling acquisition agreement already signed by Brooks Capital Holdings. Eleanor Brooks already owned 51% of Pierce and Vale. The room went silent all over again. Nathaniel looked up slowly. "You finalized this before today?" Eleanor nodded once. "I only came to see whether the company deserved saving." And suddenly, every person in that conference room understood the real reason she had walked into the boutique, dressed like an ordinary woman. The silence inside the conference room lingered long after Eleanor Brooks revealed the signed acquisition agreement. Rain continued sliding down the massive glass windows behind her while executives sat motionless around the marble table, each realizing they had spent the afternoon under silent evaluation by the very woman now controlling their future. Nathaniel Pierce closed the folder carefully, almost respectfully, before placing both hands flat against the table. For the first time in years, the legendary executive looked genuinely humbled. "You already own the company," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded once. "Legally, yes." Her gaze shifted slowly around the room. "But culture cannot be acquired through paperwork." Nobody interrupted her. Madison Clarke sat frozen near the far end of the table, staring at the signed documents as though they had erased the ground beneath her feet. The confidence she carried downstairs had completely disappeared now, replaced by the painful awareness that her own behavior had exposed everything Eleanor needed to see. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair. 3 months ago, my analysts warned me Pierce and Vale had a perception problem. Nathaniel listened carefully. They showed me declining trust among younger customers. Complaints about elitist treatment. Employees afraid to challenge toxic behavior. Her eyes briefly moved toward Madison. At first, I assumed the reports were exaggerated. Madison lowered her gaze immediately. Lily Carter remained quiet beside the executives, still struggling to understand how a normal workday had turned into a moment that might reshape the entire company. Eleanor noticed her discomfort. "Do not be nervous, Lily," she said gently. "You are not the one who failed today." The words hung heavily in the room. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "Madam Brooks, I accept responsibility for what happened." Eleanor studied him carefully. "That is why I believe you can still lead this company." Several executives looked visibly surprised. Nathaniel himself seemed caught off guard by the statement. Eleanor continued calmly. "You recognized the problem immediately once you saw it. Most leaders never do." Then her attention shifted back toward Madison. The tension in the room sharpened instantly. Madison sat perfectly still beneath the soft chandelier light, her hands clasped tightly together now. No polished speech remained. No corporate confidence. Only dread. Eleanor's voice remained soft. "Tell me honestly, Ms. Clarke, if Nathaniel Pierce had not walked downstairs when he did, what would have happened?" Madison swallowed hard. The answer sat painfully between them. I would have had security escort you out. Eleanor nodded slowly. Publicly. Madison closed her eyes briefly before answering. Yes. The room felt colder somehow after hearing her finally admit it aloud. Eleanor folded her hands calmly again. Do you understand why companies collapse? Madison's voice barely emerged above a whisper. Because they stop respecting people. Eleanor gave the smallest nod. Exactly. Nathaniel looked toward the board members beside him. Effective immediately, all executive management policies regarding client interaction will be reviewed. One executive quickly added, and staff training procedures as well. Eleanor remained calm through all of it. She had seen companies panic before. Temporary apologies were easy after public embarrassment. Real change was harder. Then she looked toward Lily once more. You saw something wrong and spoke despite the pressure around you. Lily nodded nervously. Eleanor smiled faintly. That quality is rarer than business talent. Madison stared silently at the table while the weight of that sentence settled across the room. Because everyone there understood what Eleanor valued most now. Not prestige. Not polished appearances. Character. And for the first time that day, the people in that room realized the woman in the old beige coat had been the most powerful person in the building from the moment she walked through the front door. The rain had stopped by the time the meeting finally ended. Manhattan shimmered outside the glass windows beneath reflections of traffic lights and wet pavement while the executives slowly filed out of the conference room in near silence. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Something about the afternoon had stripped away the usual corporate performance from everyone inside Pierce & Vail. Nathaniel Pierce remained near the windows for a moment after the others left, watching Eleanor Brooks gather the documents back into her worn canvas purse. It still amazed him how such an ordinary bag had carried the future of the company inside it all day, while people downstairs mocked the woman holding it. Madam Brooks, he said quietly, I hope today did not destroy your faith in this company completely. Eleanor paused before answering. Companies are made of people, Nathaniel. She slipped the final document into her purse carefully. Some disappointed me today. Some did not. Nathaniel glanced toward the hallway where Lily Carter stood speaking nervously with an assistant from Human Resources. Earlier that morning, she had been an invisible junior associate. Now senior executives were personally introducing themselves to her. Madison Clarke exited the conference room last. She looked different somehow. Smaller. The sharp confidence that once defined her had faded into something quieter and more human. She stopped near Eleanor, clearly struggling to find the right words. I spent years believing presentation was everything, Madison admitted softly. Eleanor looked at her calmly, but did not interrupt. Madison swallowed hard. I do not think I ever realized how cruel that made me become. The room remained still for a moment. No dramatic punishment came. No raised voices. No public humiliation in return. Somehow that made the moment feel heavier. Eleanor finally spoke. People become dangerous when they confuse status with worth. Madison lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Eleanor studied her quietly, as if deciding whether the apology came from fear or understanding. Perhaps both. Then learn from it, Eleanor said gently. Most people never do. Madison nodded once, unable to speak further. Nathaniel watched the exchange carefully. Quiet justice. No revenge. No spectacle. Just truth placed in the middle of the room where nobody could avoid seeing it anymore. As Eleanor walked toward the elevator, employees throughout the executive floor subtly straightened. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply watched in silence. Lily hurried forward just before the elevator doors closed. Madam Brooks. Eleanor turned. Lily hesitated nervously before speaking. Thank you for noticing me today. Eleanor's expression softened again into that small, genuine smile. Kindness should never feel invisible, Lily. The young associate looked emotional hearing those words. The elevator doors began sliding shut, but before they closed completely, Eleanor looked once more toward the city lights glowing beyond the windows. Somewhere far below, inside the flagship boutique, customers still walked across polished marble floors beneath crystal chandeliers, never realizing how close the company had come to losing everything, because people forgot how to treat another human being with dignity. And long after Eleanor Brooks disappeared behind the gold elevator doors, the silence she left behind stayed with everyone who had watched a simple woman walk into a luxury store wearing an old beige coat and reveal the character of an entire room.